Now, 14 higher education institutions in North Carolina, they earned the highest ratings in the 20th annual report about campus free speech codes. Spotlight on Speech Codes 2026. It's an analysis by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression for nearly 500 schools of higher education on one of 5 core rights in the First Amendment. In addition to free speech, the others are freedom of the press, freedom of religion, right to peaceably assemble, and the right to petition government. But it wasn't just schools in North Carolina that got reviewed, it was schools nationwide. Joining us to discuss the latest from FIRE is Ryan Anselone, Senior Program Counsel for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Ryan, thanks for taking time with us here for the States. Tell us about Spotlight on Speech Codes.
Sure. Thanks for having me. The Spotlight on Speech Codes report is one of our flagship reports. It is something we've been doing for 20 years now. We review the written policies in place at nearly 500 schools across the country, and we rate them based on the degree to which they restrict students' right to expression. And so we use that traffic light rating, red, yellow, green light, and what we really try and provide college administrators and prospective students with as much information as they can possibly have about what the environment on campus is and what administrators can do to respect students' right to free speech.
Yeah, 20 years of doing this. I'm sure you guys have seen things shift around quite a bit there at FIRE, but let's go through these various signals that you guys essentially are grading these schools on. Let's start with red lights. 13% of the schools had red lights. That's an all-time low, you guys report. 55 percentage points from 20 years ago. Ryan, what exactly is that red light?
Yeah, a red light policy is one that clearly and substantially restricts students' expressive rights. It is something that really obviously is inconsistent with the First Amendment or First Amendment standards, and it's something that a school really has to uh, change lest they run afoul of really the law.
Well,
And so,
and
yeah,
are these policies things that limit people from getting together and having protests or having their own blogs? What kinds of things would put a school or a university into that red light category?
definitely those. It's we they run the gamut. They A lot of people think of expressive rights as just the right to stand on a soapbox in the campus quad and say I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. But it's more than that. There's things like harassment policies. There's IT policies. There's posting policies. There's so many things that students, I think, take for granted that implicate free speech. And when universities make really clear restrictions on them, we see them in things like hate speech bans. A lot of people still don't understand that hate speech is not an exception to the First Amendment. Offensive speech, even. It's often core protected speech that universities think that they can restrict. And when they do, FIRE rates that and challenges it. And over 20 years, we've really seen a lot of schools start to kind of wake up and say, okay, we know we're not doing it right. Let's reach out to FIRE and figure out how we can fix that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Speech, even unpopular speech, even speech where only 2 out of 100 people may agree with, it's still considered free speech, regardless of its popularity. So interesting to see that you actually have universities reaching out to you guys after landing on the red light list, and they're like, whoa, 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 what can we do to change this?
Exactly. I mean, it's really been that when this report started 20 years ago, nearly 80% of all schools earned a red light rating. We've seen
Wow.
such a stark improvement. Um, and it's not enough, obviously. I mean, this report is just looking at written policies. That doesn't mean that a school isn't going to go step out of line. And we certainly have so many departments, so many of my colleagues do great work calling schools out on that. But we've really been able to work with a lot of schools to reform their worst policies. The majority of schools still end up with a yellow light rating, which means that it's not clear. They're using really vague language often to still restrict protected expression, and it's the sort of thing that administrators really love granting themselves as much authority as possible. And so maybe a student reading it wouldn't know, oh, this is so clearly something that I should be able to do. But they just don't know. And administrators a lot of times want to be able to step in when a crisis, a free speech crisis pops up on campus and say, oh, you actually did run afoul of this rule that we've had on the books for decades that we've never enforced. And so we still try and take as close a look at those sorts of things as we can, and make sure that students don't have to live in fear that they say the wrong thing and they're going to be put in front of a panel.
Well, and I'd imagine too, and this may be something for a question later on about the evolving pressures, but if something's a flash in a pan when it comes to the political conversation, those things likely are, some administrators who are in these red schools may clamp down on certain types of speech. And yellow schools, they may have less authority, but still something lingering there. And it's interesting, almost 70% of the schools you guys review in that yellow light category. But let's now talk about the green light category. And the news this year for you guys is you've got the highest number of green light universities for the past 20 years you guys have been doing this study.
That's right. It's a really good thing. Last year's report was the first time that we've ever seen more green light schools than red light schools, and the fact that we are widening that gap, that we're seeing more schools earn green lights and fewer schools earn red lights, is a really positive trend to see year over year. I think that we have seen free speech on college campuses be a really important topic the last few years, and I think it's led to a lot of administrators saying we need to get our house in order. And hopefully that is something that is not a flash in the pan, that it is a trend that we continue on. And we're constantly reaching out to administrators to say, look, we're not saying you can't punish unlawful harassment or discrimination, right? We're not saying that you have to let students bring megaphones into the library. Quite the contrary, but having good written policies in place make sure that students know what they can and can't do, and the administrators know what they can and can't do. And that's, I think, a green light rating goes a long way towards striking that balance.
And something else you guys with fire highlight is the Chicago statement. I'm not familiar with the Chicago statement. What exactly is that?
The Chicago statement came out of the University of Chicago, as you'd imagine, over a decade ago now. And it is basically a written commitment to respect freedom of expression. Public universities are bound by the First Amendment. Private universities have their own associational rights, but most of them, in somewhere in their written policies, promise to respect free expression. And students reading their policy should be able to expect that they're going to have the same sorts of free speech rights as their public counterparts. But adopting the Chicago statement is a really clear way for universities to, draw a line and say, we value free expression. It is central to providing a good education at a university. And we've seen over 100 schools since the University of Chicago adopted their version of the statement, adopt something substantially similar. And that has been a really positive trend. And it's just the sort of thing that enables universities to refocus on centrally important things like free speech.
Well, you got to imagine, the university's there to foster conversation and debate and dialogue. And if you're shutting down one side versus another, you can see how that can stifle the continuation of expanding one's education. But let's talk about those evolving pressures here in just the few minutes we've got left, Ryan. Obviously, we look back this week and Dr. Anthony Fauci testifying to Congress pleading the fifth, but they were trying to delve into all of the different things that were happening during the COVID pandemic. And I would imagine in the past 20 years, there have been different things that have happened in the social consciousness that may add to these pressures. Talk a little bit about that and how that plays into this issue of free speech on campuses.
Yeah, I've been at Fire. This is my sixth year. I have colleagues who have been here for so many more years. And one thing that I think is just a reality is the importance of free speech on campus is a cyclical thing. There's constantly issues of the day that universities and campus administrators and students and faculty all feel like they have to opine on, and they have to factor into their conversations. And I think ultimately, when you have these evolving pressures and you have these different mandates and different parties that you're trying to appease, you end up adopting policies that you think are going to be very important for the long haul. In that same era, the COVID era, we saw an explosion in the number of bias response teams that schools were putting in place. These are teams of administrators that are there soliciting reports from students on other students for something that might tend to offend someone or signal some sort of bias that they wanted to investigate. And we've seen in recent years, as you have a changing presidential administration, you have a renewed focus at both the federal and state level, and in a lot of states, on the importance of free speech. And they look at those sorts of policies and they say that's completely inconsistent. And so you've seen so many different investigations and laws passed by state legislatures just forcing administrators to refocus on free expression. And you hope that that's something that they take seriously in the long haul.
We'll be taking more in about freedom of expression and speech and all of the other rights in the Constitution, but greatly appreciate you taking the time with us. Ryan Anselone, Senior Program Counsel for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We'll be right back with more here with The States.